Good morning, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. 大家好, Dzień dobry Państwu. It's my great honor and pleasure to open today's webinar, which is dedicated to the role of public diplomacy and the media in relations between China, Poland, and Taiwan. So it seems it will be a pretty exciting webinar today. I would like to thank the Institute of Political Science of Academia Sinica in Taiwan for hosting us today. Just a technical thing, in the corner on the right side, on the bottom, there is a chat. So if anyone would like to ask a question, please feel free to do so. So without further delays, I would like to introduce our first guest, Professor Lukasz Zamecki, who is a researcher and lecturer at the Faculty of Political Science and International Studies of the University of Warsaw. He is also Dean's Plenipotentiary for the discipline of Political Science and Administration. In 2016-2020, he was the Vice Dean of the Faculty of Scientific Research and International Relations of the University of Warsaw. His research areas include democratization, comparative politics, Hong Kong politics, among others. Professor, the floor is yours.
Good morning everyone. Good morning here in Europe, and good evening, as I understand, in Taiwan. Should I start the presentation?
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay. So let me start the presentation. Okay.
Yes, we can see that.
Okay, you should see the presentation. First of all, thank you everyone. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you for the possibility to being here. It's my great pleasure. Thank you for that. Particularly, as Antonina said, I'm interested in the processes of democratization and de-democratization, democratic backsliding. But today I was asked to say a few words about the relations between Taiwan and Poland, and I would like to present a short presentation about the perception of Taiwan in Poland, especially during the COVID-19 pandemic, because in my opinion it changed a little bit the perception of Taiwan in Poland. First of all, we should be aware that knowledge about Taiwan among Poles is not great, to be honestly speaking. Of course, it's not easy to study the knowledge about the Taiwan among Poles, because Taiwan is not even included into opinion polls made in Poland. We have the opinion polls about relations, about the perception of the nations among Poles, but Taiwan is not included in those opinion polls. So it's not easy, but we can guess that the knowledge about the situation, about the relations, the position, and so on is not great. When we talk about not only about the perception among the citizens, but also when we talk on the level of the institutions, attitudes of Polish public institution toward Taiwan are, of course, it's not something amazing, but are a result of Polish relations with other powers, superpowers, regional powers. Here, of course, the US, the relations with the US and People's Republic of China is the most important. And we could talk here more because the relations with the United States are very important. No matter what kind of government, what kind of political option is in power in Poland, relations with the United States are important for the Polish foreign policy. When we talk about People's Republic of China, the relations are fluctuant, but last years we can say the relations were more important for the Polish governments. Now the situation is in a critical moment, we could say, because we see that also among the countries which were included in the 17+1 initiative started by China, those relations with the China goes into the process of some changes. So we can ask about the further position of the Polish government toward those specific and strong relations with the People's Republic of China. And my thesis is that interest in Taiwan, the perception of Taiwan, has risen during last months, and we can study that by the number of the publication about Taiwan published here in Poland, and also the knowledge of the Poles about Taiwan. It's of course specifically connected to the role and policy that Taiwan took during the pandemic. But I will say about that in a few more words in a moment. The perception of Taiwan in Poland, of course, is a result of few factors. First of all, we need to be aware that East Asia, generally speaking, is not in the center of the news in Poland. Of course, the People's Republic of China is, and the information about China are more happens more often, and we can observe them more often in Polish media. But when we talk about the other nations, regions, countries in East Asia, this region is not in the center of the news in Poland. Of course, this is connected to the issue that the most important regions take into consideration Polish foreign policy are located in Europe. The relations important for Poland concentrate on the European Union, Russia, post-Soviet area, and of course Euro-Atlantic, like with the United States or with the NATO pact. But from my own field, I could say that last years we can see a growing number of the students from Asia at Polish universities, and in my opinion, we will observe the important role of those students, young people, in changing the perception of Asia, is also East Asia in Poland. Recently, during last month, or maybe broadly speaking, during last year, the coverage regarding Taiwan in Polish media raised. It's connected to the few issues. First of all, in Poland, we also could observe in Polish media the information about some tensions between Taiwan and People's Republic of China. I'm pretty sure that everyone here remember this front page from The Economist, the most dangerous region in the world, with the map of Taiwan. Anyway, in those tensions, of course, not to the let's say average citizens, but for those of the people who observe the international relations, international situations, they could observe more information about the Taiwan, also the Taiwan in Polish media. The perception of Taiwan in Poland can change also due to the better relations between Poland and Taiwan. And when I'm saying better relations, I mean mostly the economic relations. Polish media underlined the kind of success of our government in the relations with Taiwan, that Taiwan decided to open its market for the Polish apples. As far as I heard, it's also appreciated by the Taiwan. During the pandemic, of course, we know that and we had even the special names for that relations, this pandemic relations. We could observe the People's Republic of China activity during the pandemic in the relations with the European Union countries, and of course in Poland we also noticed this donation of 1 million face masks to Poland in April and May 2020. Partially, maybe on the perception of Taiwan in Poland can influence the issue that Polish airlines LOT launched the first ever direct passenger and cargo charter flights between Poland and Taiwan. It also happens during the pandemic. We had those special flights, and probably we'll see them more often. The relations and the perception of Taiwan in Poland is connected to those issues, but of course we can build a broader context of that relations, and we can notice that in 2018 Warsaw Trade Office in Taipei was renamed into Polish Office in Taipei, and the Chinese embassy, People's Republic of China embassy, tried to protest when there was this change of the name, but we were, as far as I know, one of the last European Union countries to had not the office, the national office in Taiwan, but a kind of capital city office in Taipei. So of course it does not change the relations, but anyway, it's also kind of significant moment in that relations. I try to, although I do not had a lot of time to prepare that presentation, but I tried to check also the activities of the Polish Taiwanese Parliamentary Group in Polish Parliament, in Sejm, one of the chamber of the Polish Parliament. We have this parliamentary group concentrated on the relations with Taiwan, and we can notice that this cadency, this time, this group is the biggest since the establishment of that group. It has 93 members. And we need to take into consideration that totally in Sejm, in Polish Parliament, in that chamber of the Polish Parliament, we have 460 members. So I can say that 93 members is quite a lot, and this is the biggest number since the establishment of this Polish Taiwanese parliamentary group. We had already a few cadences of that group. Of course, I do not have the time to study the visibility of this parliamentary group in Polish media, but anyway, my opinion is that it's not only the biggest, but one of the most active cadency of that group. We have between the Poland and Taiwan the annual economic consultation, and since we had this, the economic relations and the export from Poland to Taiwan is growing, we can say that we have the increasing importance of that consultation. Last month we had a few new agreements signed, for example, between the Polish Agency for Enterprise Development and Taiwanese Small and Medium Enterprise Administration, or another agreement between the Polish Center for Accreditation and Taiwan Accreditation Foundation. So those are the cases of the new agreements and recent development in cooperation between those two regions. I already mentioned that we have also the rising Polish export to Taiwan. So still Taiwan is one of the 7 regions in Asia to cooperate with, but anyway, we can notice the rising export to Taiwan, so this can also build the relations and the perception of Taiwan in Poland. One of the most important, but probably more for the Taiwanese side activity last month was the implementation of the Comprehensive Criminal Justice Cooperation Agreement. Why I think that maybe for the Taiwanese side it's more important, because Poland was the first country to sign this kind of agreement with Taiwan among the European Union countries. And to show somehow the raising role or the perception of Taiwan in Poland, I've checked during last weekend the number of the articles in one of the Polish newspaper, Gazeta Wyborcza. This is one of the most important and most influential newspaper in Poland. The number of articles with including the Taiwan word, and we can see that in 2017 it was only 8 articles concerning the word Taiwan. In 2018 it was 7, in 2019 it was 17, and in 2020 37. Of course, those articles, papers were concerning the issue of the elections in Taiwan. But anyway, we can say that somehow the pandemic helped to gain this visibility of Taiwan in Poland, because in 2020 we had a lot of papers and articles underlying the Taiwanese policy toward the pandemic, very successful strategy. I know that during last week we can observe that here in Poland the number of cases in Taiwan is rising, but anyway we need to admit that in 2020 the Taiwanese policy was very successful. And to somehow to support that thesis, I've checked at the Polish Google, how often the term Taiwan was searched in Poland, and we can see that the highest number of googling the Taiwan in the Polish Google was March 2020. You can see the peak on the picture. It's March 2020. So we can guess that it's connected to the pandemic situation, probably because we see that this peak is quite significant, quite visible concerning the other moments. Also take into consideration the elections, presidential elections in Taiwan. To conclude and to find the most important aspects of that perception, of course, the Polish growing interest in Taiwan can be also seen through the global growth of interest in Taiwan. We see that especially it happens when we had the shift in the perception of People's Republic of China here in Europe. This is mostly connected to the growing numbers of articles, news, information, what's happening in Xinjiang concerning the Uyghurs. So especially after 2018, we could observe more and more information about that. Of course, 2019 in Hong Kong. So the national law has changed the perception of the role of People's Republic of China in Hong Kong. So those cases has change a little bit the perception of the People's Republic of China here in Europe. And then the pandemic happens. And of course, we also had a discussion here in Europe about the role of China in the pandemic, not only, I mean, the outbreak, but also this pandemic diplomacy. We have, for instance, European Council on Foreign Relations underline, take into consideration some opinion polls they ask to conduct, that the perception of China is changing, and we have a decrease in the number of people praising the relations with the People's Republic of China. So this is important moment, and in that situation, also Taiwan gains some interest concerning those pandemic issues. So very broadly, of course, those are the most important changes we can observe here in Poland concerning the Taiwan. As you can see, I couldn't present a lot of numbers supporting that thesis, but I believe that we can treat that presentation as a kind of beginning for the deeper studies, and those theses, I believe, could be verified in the research, especially when we talk about this visibility of Taiwan here in Poland, and the factors which helped gain this visibility of Taiwan in Poland, and of course the changing relations on the level of the public institutions, because this is connected to the changing role toward the European countries, changing its role toward the People's Republic of China, and in that situation we can see that Taiwan is more visible also because more and more public institutions in the European Union countries is changing the policy toward the China. Of course, also the Donald Trump administration has changed, as we can know, the relations with China, and the countries like Poland, which supported, I mean, of course, the governing politicians who supported the relations with the Donald Trump administration also influenced the relations with China, and in the same situation with Taiwan. So those are the most important conclusions. Thank you for your attention, and if you will have any questions, do not hesitate to contact me. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor, for your very interesting presentation. I'm sure there will be more questions afterwards in our Q&A session. Without further delay, I would like to introduce our another guest, Professor Robert Rajczyk, who is a journalist and political scientist. He is an associate professor at the University of Silesia in Katowice in Poland. He specializes in the analysis of policies in the Central and East Europe and Southeast Asia regions, as well as mass communication and propaganda. He has been Taiwan Fellowships Program recipient in 2015, 17, 19, and 21, as I also understand. Professor, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation. It's a great pleasure for me to be here today with our participants. Let me share with you my presentation. I hope you can see my screen.
Yes, it is visible.
No?
Thank you.
Okay, so let me talk for a few minutes about Taiwan's public diplomacy in Poland. Before I start, I would like to remind the definition of term public relation. As a matter of fact, it's one of the soft power key instrument, and in another way, it could be defined as a process of communication with foreign publics to gain the understanding to states' interests and values. So, as far as the definition is concerned, it's okay. So let's analyze the Taiwanese public diplomacy in Poland. In my opinion, public diplomacy, Taiwan's especially public diplomacy, determines the Taiwan's international visibility. And let's check the details. The contemporary Taiwan's public diplomacy is based on the political program of President Tsai Ing-wen. It's called Street Fast Diplomacy. The executive dimension has been being conducted by the Presidential Office, Department of Public Affairs, responsible, for example, for the project concerning spending the night in the presidential building, in the presidential office in Taipei 2 years ago. By the way, 2 Polish bloggers were involved in it, being winners of the contents, allowing to spend a night at the presidential office building. As far as the executive dimension of Taiwan's public diplomacy, not only in Poland but in the world generally is concerned, we have to mention three branches: Institute of Diplomacy and International Affairs, which is supervised by Minister of Foreign Affairs, the Public Diplomacy Coordination Council, and the Department of International Information Services, which is responsible for issuing periodicals such as Taiwan Review or Taiwan Panorama, even Taiwan at a Glance. And all of those periodicals are available in Poland in printed version, including Travel in Taiwan, which is issued by the Taiwan Tourism Bureau, supervised by Taiwan Ministry of Communication and Transportation. All those periodicals are available, as I have said, in a printed version in Taipei Representative Office in Poland. And this office is the one of the 2 pillars of Taiwan official institutional presence in Poland. Taiwan Representative Office in Warsaw is responsible for consular and economic affairs. And the second institutional is a Taiwan External Trade Development Council that organizes Taiwan, for example, Taiwanese trade mission to Poland, and promotes Taiwan's business in Republic of Poland. And let's analyze the forms of Taiwan's public diplomacy in Poland. Here we have to mention people-to-people diplomacy, scientific diplomacy, economic one, cultural. As you can see, they are anthology of contemporary Taiwan literature, for example, in Polish language, issued last year. There is also a parliamentary public diplomacy, which has been mentioned by my predecessor. And at the end, of course, there is a digital diplomacy, a kind of public diplomacy. Let me concentrate on people-to-people diplomacy. There is a Taiwan International Cooperation and Development Fund, which is engaged in many projects in European Union states such as Lithuania or Bulgaria. But the key idea of Taiwan International Cooperation Development Fund is that there is a alumni society in Poland with the members who were engaged in projects led by International Cooperation and Development Fund. So there is an alumni society on the one hand. On the other hand, there are plenty of students and scholars from Poland have been being graduated by the grants and for example, a Taiwan Fellowship program. There are over 40 scholars since 2010 who had 50 grants altogether within the Taiwan Fellowship program, which is coordinated by the National Central Library and financed by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. The second possibility about the researching grant comes from the Center for Chinese Studies, which is the division of National Central Library in Taipei. Taiwan scholarship financed by the Ministry of Education, and some scholarships for the researchers made by the private foundation, Taiwan Foundation for Democracy, and the Chiang Ching-kuo Foundation. As far as studying in Taiwan is concerned, there are over 120 bilateral agreements between sisters university in Poland and Taiwan. At least 760 Taiwanese students study at 20 universities in Poland. It's data from the last year before the pandemic, so from the 2019. Over 250 Polish students were in Taiwan 2 years ago. Taiwanese students usually study at medical schools, at medical universities in Poznań and Lublin. There is also Polish National Agency for Academic Exchange, which is responsible for exchanging bilateral program between Polish and Taiwanese university. Those programs are especially dedicated to the learning of Mandarin language. But here I would like to mention something which is a very unique initiative. It's called Taiwan European Union Studies. It is located at the Warsaw School of Economics. It's responsible for the promoting Taiwan as well as scientific research about the Taiwanese economy. The next issue concerns TAITRA. It means Taiwan External Trade Development Council. So we are now talking about the economic diplomacy, which is made by the Iron Force, a company which is located in Zabrze, in the Silesia region, and the Textier Europe, which is the glue producer located in Gniezno near Poznań. But here I would like to mention also some Taiwan bistro. The most famous one is led by the Taiwanese from Kaohsiung. It's called Kuku Bistro in the center of Krakow, near the Krakow main square. It's famous for its delicious food and, of course, bubble tea. But in this case, I would like to mention that the amount of Taiwanese restaurant is emerging nowadays in Poland. You can find some of them in Poznań, Warsaw, unfortunately not in Silesia. There is also a Taiwanese Chamber of Commerce which helps Taiwanese businessmen to operate in Poland. We were talking about the Polish Taiwanese Parliamentary Committee in a minute, so I'm not going to repeat all those information provided here by my predecessor. Next issue, it's about digital diplomacy. Taipei Representative Office in Poland, TAITRA in Warsaw. Both institutions have their own Twitter and Facebook accounts, and of course the web pages which are used to communicate with the audience in Polish, either in Polish or English language, of course including the Mandarin one. And As far as a Taiwanese public diplomacy is concerned, we cannot forget the information policy and the cooperation within the realization, developing the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. This is also the idea of Taiwanese government or of Taiwanese authorities. Within the project, under the name Taiwan Can Help, we were talking about the donation of 1 million medical masks. It's about this idea. The information policy was seen 3 years ago in Katowice. This impact of Taiwanese public diplomacy was seen in Katowice during the COP24 UN climate conference. And during this conference in Katowice, there was a tram colored in Taiwan message, riding in the key center of Katowice, showing the Taiwan's willing to help the global community to fight with climate change. At the occasion of the 17th anniversary of the first General Assembly of United Nations General Assembly, there was a letter published in Polish press, a letter written by the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Republic of China, Taiwan, Mr. Wu. The speech was about an offer of Taiwan's help to the world, and some conclusions at the end of my short presentations. I hope it's visible. The public diplomacy is a tool to enhance being relevant and not marginalized in the region and on the world stage at large. Despite the predicament and due to the high level of economic growth, Taiwan is faced to be vulnerable, reliable, responsible, and significant member of international community. Development assistance and humanitarian aid shall be conducted as the most effective ones in order to enhance the Taiwanese international visibility. Activities in new media are focused on enhancing the economic status of Republic of China in the international economic exchange. Thank you very much for your attention. Sorry for inconvenience with the presentation.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Just as a quick reminder to everyone, in the bottom of the screen on the right side, there is a chat. So please feel free to type your questions there. After the last presentation, we will proceed to the Q&A session. And finally, our last speaker today, Professor Kuo Yujen, who is currently a professor at the Institute of China and Asia Pacific Studies of the National Sun Yat-sen University. He is also a director at the Institute for National Policy Research, advisor to the Mainland Affairs Council, distinguished research fellow at Taiwan's National Defense University, and the president to the Taiwan Society of Japan Studies. His main research interests include Japan's defense industry, US-Japan relations, and military alliance, as well as Japan's defense policy. But today, Professor Kuo will talk about China and Taiwan and the disinformation policy. Professor, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair. And it's quite an honor to be invited to this important webinar today. And I think I should start to share my PowerPoint. Okay, can you see my PowerPoint?
Yes, it is visible. Thank you.
Okay. First of all, I have to thank again to the invitation from Academia Sinica for today's webinar. And my topic is a little bit, harder than the previous two presentations. I will talk about China's disinformation campaign against Taiwan on security issues, which has been happening quite recently. Okay, as we all know, all these disinformation or misinformation campaign from China to Taiwan, it's all about cognitive manipulation. And I kind of sum up from the beginning. China started to, painting colors on security issues regarding Taiwan from mid 2020, last year. Starting from June. And the main theme is to remind or to bring up again this more than a century of historical humiliation and great regionalization of China. And they try to frame Taiwan on this scheme. So I will introduce some cases later, but there are 5 main themes that China tried to portray. First of all, U.S. As a hegemonic stance, and it's a evil empire. And secondly, it's DPP, it's a ruling party of Taiwan. It's very ideological and provocative, which is a traitor to Chinese race. And number 3, those they tend to portray there are many loyal Chinese soldiers in Taiwanese military. So this provocative stance from DPP is making the Taiwanese military having very low morale. And number 4 is the military cooperation between U.S. and Taiwan is a combination of evil plus traitor. And number 5 is the PLA, Chinese military, is having very strong capabilities and holding the righteous stance. So those are the scheme and layout of stories we can see from some real life examples. Starting from June last year, as you all know, China's disinformation and misinformation campaign against Taiwan has been playing for a long time. But targeting at security issue, it just started from June last year. We found out on June 13th, 2020, there is a fake news about the U.S. is going to deploy more than 50,000 soldiers in Taiwan. So that I don't know if you guys read Chinese or not. Those are, they try to make the fake story, very real. And they have this South China Sea Strategic Situation Probing Initiative. And, it's a serious project, but, once in a while, start spreading fake news or disinformation through Twitter or Weibo. So you can see this last year, July, these so-called SCSPI spread out. There was a U.S. Air Force RC-135 plane flying into, as you can see from flying into Taiwan's territorial air. August last year, similar again. This platform basically spread out fake news saying that the U.S. Air Force EP-3E departure from Taiwan's airport. August, same month, August 31st last year, again, you can see they try to fabricate those flight routes or U.S. airplanes entering in and out of Taiwanese territorial air. September last year, this is about the U.S. destroyer entering Taiwan's territorial waters. And this is even more ridiculous. It was September 4th last year. This fake story is basically saying that the Taiwan's air defense missile shoot down a Chinese Su-35 fighter jet, and they try to make the scene look like real, and then it was all on news both in Taiwan and in China. November 17th, 2020, that was a tragedy that F-16 fighter jet crashed into ocean. But China fabricated this as is Colonel Zhang, the pilot, carrying out night flight training, but decided to betray Taiwan and landed at Xiamen Airport. And Zhang was under protection. November last year, again, another ridiculous fake news saying that the U.S. forces already take over Taiwan's missile defense system. And early this year, you can see they try to make up stories saying that the Chinese cargo plane entering Taiwan's territorial air. And the last one was March 30th this year. Again, there was airplane crash in Taiwan, and China made it again betray of Taiwanese pilots, and then returning to China, the embrace of mother country. And the conclusion is quite simple. This is cognitive warfare, and they have this kind of manipulation targeting at four main purposes. Number one is to create confusion and alienation, and in order to sabotage internal Taiwan and external partners' communication. And number two purpose is to intensify internal disputes within Taiwan to cause internal friction. And number three is to weaken Taiwanese people's media literacy and empathy about security issues. So that way they can crash down Taiwanese people's mental defense. Number four is to create, I think this is the most important one and the most serious one, is to create possible excuse to send ultimatum and the use of force against Taiwan. So those are, the following some, examples and what had happened in the past 1 or 2 years, creating distrust between Taiwan and its partners, mainly about the States and Japan. And number two is create this kind of alienation between Taiwanese government, the media, opposition party, and the general public, and to create any alienation within the Taiwanese military, and then to portray President Tsai Ing-wen's defense policy as ideological and provocative. And there are more real-life cases, and I can share during the Q&A section. So those are my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor, for your great presentation. So it's time for us to open the Q&A session. Another reminder, please feel free to type your questions in the chat section. Before that happens, because I guess our listeners need some time to type those questions, I would like to start with my own, if you allow me to. So perhaps I would like to start with a question to Professor Kuo. To make it fair, because he was the last presenter, so perhaps the first question could be addressed to him. Professor Kuo, once again, thank you very much for this very insightful and very important presentation. As far as I understand, you were talking all the time about how China is trying to use its disinformation campaign against Taiwanese people and change Taiwanese people's opinion about their own country. So I wanted to ask you how this sort of disinformation campaign works when it comes to non-Chinese speakers. So, for example, people in Europe or in the United States. what are the similarities and differences, if there are any, between China's strategy on this field? Like you were showing the kind of pieces of information, right? So are they the same, or the content is a little bit different? How does it look like? Thank you.
Should I answer right now?
Yes, please.
Okay, thank you for the question. Of course, China's target of disinformation campaign mainly on Taiwanese people or Chinese speakers, of course. But as the previous two presentations from our policy scholars, we all know that for non-Chinese speakers around the world, they have very limited knowledge or perception about Taiwan. So when China tried to channel all this disinformation or misinformation, fake news about Taiwan through different media channels, it will create confusion. And then the confusion was basically impeding foreigners to get further understanding Taiwan, since they have very limited knowledge background about Taiwan. So again, that was China's purpose, to create confusion or alienation within Taiwan, and also to Taiwan's relation with foreign countries, including their people. So that's my answer. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm also encouraging our distinguished guests to make some comments or ask each other some questions. I guess it would be, it is a great chance to talk about issues which seem at the first glance not very well related, but I'm sure that when we take a deeper look, we do see that all these issues are actually connected. So I can already see a question from Professor Zamecki and also to Professor Kuo. So let me read it out loud, if you allow me to. So Professor Zamecki says, very interesting speech by Professor Kuo. In Poland, we can observe Russian activities to influence Polish public opinion. Can I ask about the changes of Chinese disinformation activities regarding the means and moments in which those activities are more frequent?
Thank you again for the question. I think China's fake news or disinformation campaign, especially on Taiwan security issues, have been working pretty well. As we all know, that security issue is originally very alienated, irrelevant to people's everyday life. So the general public basically holding very alienated attitude to security issues or defense policy. And in addition to China's intentional disinformation campaign, we are basically talking about, not just confusion, but also to make people, the general public of Taiwan, getting to feel more and more remote from the government's defense policy, which is, I believe, is very dangerous. As we all know, a healthy defense policy requires people's full support. And another dangerous point that I, from my observation, is, from my presentation, you can see all those stories are very ridiculous, and it's almost impossible. Take that Su-35 fighter jet, for example. They claim, Chinese government claim that Taiwan shoot down their fighter jet, and then they also create a physical scene there for taking pictures. We feel ridiculous. That is exactly what they want. They want you to feel that's ridiculous, but you don't know, one day they will take it, Chinese government will take it serious. They will make a scene and then telling the world and also the Taiwanese people that your government really did something wrong, and then sending Taiwanese government ultimatum to apologize for further investigation, even accepting China to send investigators to enter Taiwan to investigating in that particular incident, that which was never happened. And in that case, I 100% believe that our government has zero preparation for that. And then during that kind of scenario, our people feel bizarre. I mean, they basically don't know who is telling lies and truth. And that's the most dangerous spot for democracy. So we had a webinar last month with Hungary think tank. It's called Political Capital. We exchange ideas, and in Eastern Europe, countries also experience quite similar disinformation campaign from Russia. So again, thank you for your question.
Thank you very much for giving such a very detailed answers. So we have another question from the audience. Thank you all for providing these in-depth presentations. It was indeed very informative. As Poland is a big country in terms of scale and population in the 16+1 structure, China has been very proactive towards Poland, such as invite Foreign Minister Rao to China recently. How does the major atmosphere in Polish society feel about 16+1 and China in general? How about the major Polish media outlets portray affairs relating to China? I guess we can address these two questions to both Professor Zamecki and Professor Rajczyk. So I don't know, perhaps Professor Zamecki would like to start.
Thank you very much. Indeed, it's a very important question, and we have a discussion about the role of Poland in the 17+1, 16+1 format. Taking into consideration the last question about the Polish media and general major atmosphere in Polish society, of course, probably the citizens do not talk about this format, because most of the people do not know a lot about that format. But when we talk about the expert, politicians, the media, first of all, we need to take into consideration that this format is changing its role. When the China proposed that, many countries, also Poland, saw that proposal of the cooperation of that format as a door to Chinese investments in Poland and, generally speaking, in Central Europe. So there were quite a huge expectation that we can find a kind of third way to sustain our economic growth, that China can be a partner, important partner in the trade relations and in the investments. And Poland was also seen, as far as I know, from the Chinese side as a very important, because the biggest, as you mentioned, the biggest and probably the most influential country in that format. So also Poland was seen as a kind of door to the European Union, to the bigger role of China in that region of the Europe. But after a few years, we can see that those expectations were not met. Many countries, also here in Poland, we have a discussion if we have a real input of that format. If we expected probably the more investments, more open policy toward the Polish export and the relations. We had as a Poland, we had a huge deficit in the trade relations, the biggest in the European Union, deficit in trade. So we saw that format as an important part of our economic relations, also investment relations, but those expectations were not met. And now, this what I mentioned a little bit in my presentation. Also, the political situation is changing. So a lot of countries, for instance, show the reaction of People's Republic of China toward the Czech Republic or Lithuania when they started to lower the relations with China. I mean there were cases of this 5G issue, of some political involvement of China in the situation in the country. Czech Republic and Lithuania, and also, for instance, concentrated more on the relations with the Republic of China, with Taiwan. So we had a very forceful reaction of China. So many countries started to see that that relations in a different way. Of course, China gained somehow in that relation, because we see that the countries like Hungary or Serbia are seen as important partners of China now in Central Europe, and somehow it's a success of this format. But many countries among those 16 or 17 now, but we should speak 16 because then we speak about Central Europe. Those countries and lower the relation. We could saw that in February. I believe it was the last summit between China and 16 countries, 17 countries, and we saw that many countries were represented on the level of the ministries, not of the on the higher diplomatic level. So it also is somehow it's a kind of sign, yes, a sign how they see those relations. When you talk about the Poland, I have a problem to speak about my own country in that way that we can see some kind of two groups, in my opinion, in Poland, and I'm not able to locate them, but we can see that among the governing bodies now we have a group of the politicians, officials who would like to see better relations with China. Probably the president Andrzej Duda, president of Poland, is in that group. But when we talk about the relations with Mr. Xi Jinping, President Xi Jinping, and some good relations with the Chinese bodies, but we have also in our government, I have a feeling the group which take into consideration the relations with United States and more assertive stance of United States toward China, that we should not go very deep in that relations with China. So for sure this relations is changing nowadays here in Poland. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this very detailed answer. Perhaps I would like to ask Professor Rajczyk the same question, because the question is not only about the major atmosphere in Polish society, but also the major Polish media outlets and how they portray affairs relating to China. Professor, would you mind answering this question as well?
Of course, I can generally, I agree with the Professor Zamecki, but I would like to add some short issues. First of all, in my opinion, there is the situation as far as a Polish-China's relation is concerned in major Polish media outlets. They made Sin 16+1 initiative as a threat to the national security, even to the national economy, according to the Montenegro's example, that is in danger of bankruptcy because of the China financed investment. Another issue concerning national security in Poland is connected with the Huawei and the 5G technology. The discussion in the media is in the context of the national threat for national security. And the last one, as far as Hungary is concerned, there is an argue between the opposition, Budapest Mayor György Karácsony, and the government. The mayor is against investment concerning Fudan University campus, and he's supporting by the mass protesters made by the students. But generally speaking, in short words, in my opinion, in Poland there is a discussion about the threat concerning national security a threat which could be caused by the in the future maybe by the 16+1 initiative. Thanks.
Thank you very much for your answer.
If I can
yes,
add,
please
if I
go
can
ahead.
add to this, what Professor Rajczyk said, very important issue, those security issue. And in Poland, we had the media concentrated, and we had a huge discussion about the case of the Chinese citizen working for Huawei, who was arrested as a Chinese spy. So to give you the case to this, what Professor Rajczyk said, are very well discussed case. And a few days ago, I believe the court started to proceed that spying case. So this is very important. Yes, that's true.
Thank you very much for that information. It's actually very, very important, very interesting. I still remind all our listeners that you are free to add your questions in the chat section. Meanwhile, I have another question to Professor Rajczyk, because you were talking about all those initiatives that are undertaken by the Taiwanese government, Taiwanese authorities to promote Taiwan and Poland. But since we are already talking about all those issues in the context of China, how successful do you think all these actions can be in the context of China's soft power and public relations when it comes to Poland? For example, in comparison to what the Confucius Institute or institutes are doing in Poland, we are not like the US, where Confucius Institutes are being shut down, and where it is being said that Taiwanese institutes are expected to replace Confucius Institutes at many American universities. We don't have that situation. So Confucius Institutes are very welcomed, I guess, in Poland. So how would you compare the power and potential of Taiwan's public diplomacy with China's public diplomacy on the Polish ground?
Well, first of all, we have to mention that the awareness of separate China's policy and Taiwanese policy is not seen very clearly in Poland. So maybe not usually, but sometimes there is a misunderstanding opinion that the China also means Taiwan. This is not true. Taiwan is, of course, a separate and independent state, not the separate independent state. But comparing those two activities, I mean, Confucius Institutes and the Taiwanese public diplomacy in Poland, China is a rich country which can spend a lot of money for the promotion, but this promotion, in my opinion, is a bit aggressive, especially during the pandemic, whereas a Taiwanese one is a real soft promotion, a delicate one, and this promotion operates with some sophisticated tools, such as promoting culture, studies in Taiwan. There is a imbalance in those two states' promotion efforts, in my opinion. Imbalance.
Thank you very much. We are still waiting for some questions from our audience. Meanwhile, perhaps another question to Professor Zamecki, because you were talking about how Taiwan has become more visible in Poland during the pandemic. But as we know here in Taiwan, at least, right now we are having the Alert 3 level, not a lockdown per se, but the whole country is pretty much functioning as if it was a lockdown, because people even voluntarily choose to stay at home, not to go out. Today we have a public holiday, but still many people decided not to go out, not to travel, and they're just staying at home. So how about the Polish coverage on this issue, the fact that Taiwan now is in a way fighting with the pandemic, the situation is a little bit out of control in comparison to what we have observed for the last 1 year. There is a big discussion about the insufficient number of vaccines. So now a lot here is being said about Japan's help and United States help in terms of sending vaccines to Taiwan. So do we have any response from Poland in the Polish media? Are these matters discussed among Polish people? And do you think that it might actually affect this positive image of Taiwan in its fight against pandemic that we've had so far?
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. That's true. It's also very interesting for me because, as I said, during last year we had this perception of Taiwan, and it was presented in media, in Polish media also, as a successful story. How the Taiwan deal with the pandemic, and I was also interested if there will be a change of this story now, but I can't observe that. So maybe this is due to the fact that it's a very recent situation. So maybe we'll need to somehow shift in that discussion, the presentation of Taiwan policy. But to be honest, I don't believe that there will be a huge change. First of all, media so much presented Taiwan as a great story that they want now to change that opinion. But to be honest, I know that for Taiwan is a great challenge, but take into consideration the number of cases that we had in Europe, and it was counted in the dozen of thousands every day. So those 200-300 cases concerning the Taiwanese nation, it's not a lot, to be honest. So maybe this will also influence that there won't be a shift, a change of that opinion about the Taiwan policy. But of course, answering on your questions, we can observe some short notes in the media that what's happening in Taiwan, that there is a growing number of cases, but as far I couldn't observe any debate, for instance, if it means that Taiwan policy was not so successful. Now only short notes about the number of cases without any debate about the policy. So this is the answer.
Thank you. And actually, I agree with you totally when my Taiwanese colleagues or friends ask me about, how I'm doing under the lockdown. I explain to them how the situation looked like, or, in Poland over the last year when we had like 30,000 cases per day or something. And I'm just trying to calm them down that really it's a totally different situation right now that we have in Taiwan. Meanwhile, we have a question from Professor Kuo to both of our Polish guests. So thank you, Professor Kuo, for your question. Let me read it out loud now. Thank you to the two Polish scholars' share of insightful opinions. I would like to take this chance to ask both of you one question. Since Poland... I'm sorry, just give me a second. It disappeared for a moment. Okay, since Poland deployed the US Aegis Ashore system, how China reacted to that? How was that issue discussed in Polish media? Thank you. Professor Zamecki?
This is very hard question. So I'm afraid that I'm not able to answer that correctly because probably if someone from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Poland would be interested in talking about such cases, probably no. But anyway, those are the people who could tell more if there was any reaction of the Chinese embassy here in Warsaw. So I do not have any knowledge about the China reaction on that. Probably it was made on the level of the Chinese embassy and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Poland. Maybe there was a kind of public discussion about that, but I couldn't notice that. So I'm not sure if there was any public discussion about how China react, because of course we talk and a lot about the United States investment in the Polish defense system. So we have those discussion and the information every day. But anyway, I'm not sure if I observe any discussion about how China react to that. And in Poland, we are more concentrated on how Russia react on those investments, to be honest.
Thank you very much, Professor. Professor Rajczyk, would you like to add something?
Yes, exactly one sentence. That question, in my opinion, concerns the US-China relation, as a matter of fact, because the Poland is not a keynote state in the European Union. So discussion of deploying this system is probably dominated by the potential Russian reaction, as Professor Zamecki says. So I totally agree with him.
Thank you. Meanwhile, we have a comment about you might say, Polish activity in Taiwan. Polish missionaries promote public diplomacy here in Taiwan. For example, a Polish Christmas was held last year. Polish language was taught too. I can confirm that. I participated in that Polish Christmas at the Fujian Catholic University. So absolutely, there is a very visible Polish activity, cultural activity and language activity in Taiwan as well. Another question. First of all, thank you for...
If I can add,
yes, please.
If I can add, Antonina, to that, we have some Polish minority in Taiwan, as far as I know, and we have a very nice delegation of Poland to Taiwan now. So I know that they are very active, and we are very happy here in Poland that Poland is presented so nicely in Taiwan. But of course, the European Union representation in Taiwan represent the whole European Union, but we need to underline that also the fact that the official from Poland, the Pole, is head of this European Union delegation in Taiwan. So I think that our soft power, this is what Professor Rajczyk is expert in, but our soft power is also rising in Taiwan.
And I can absolutely agree with you, because I've been in touch with the Polish office in Taipei and the Fujian Catholic University and other universities where Polish activity is visible. So absolutely, I think that, well, they are doing a very good job. So this is something we can be proud of, I think. Okay, meanwhile, another question. First of all, thank you for your presentation today. I would like to ask some simple questions. What do you think about G7 conference in these days? Is that G7 cooperation will really threat China seriously in the media? Besides, how will Polish government react from this? Perhaps Professor Rajczyk would like to start.
Today's G7's support for the peace relation in Taiwan Strait, it's a strong signal for China. But as far as Polish government reaction to this is concerned, in my opinion, that wouldn't any reaction, because if would be any reaction, it would be kind of the political suicide. It would be against the G7 statement. I wouldn't believe in it. So if would be any reaction, it would concern a support of G7. But what about the China threat in the media? I don't think so. China will be in such a situation or in such uncomfortable position. I think it's a strong signal for China to avoid provocations, to avoid interference, and to a signal to China to be careful about the provocative gestures against Taiwan.
Professor Zamecki, would you like to add something?
I would agree with Professor Rajczyk that probably we won't observe any great reaction of Polish government toward those conclusion of G7 summit. Of course, the Polish media informed about the most important conclusion, but of course they started with the issue concerning the vaccination process and the Russia also. The China was somewhere lower, we could say, but of course they noticed that there was a kind of signal toward the China that about the situation in Xinjiang and Hong Kong. But anyway, I agree with Professor Rajczyk that probably there won't be any great reaction toward that, and of course we concentrated on the issue which are closer to the Polish hearts, like Russia and the vaccination process.
Perhaps I could address this question also to Professor Kuo, because we are talking so far about the Polish perspective and Polish view on G7 summit. So how is it perceived from the Taiwanese perspective?
Okay, thank you for the question. As far as I read the joint communique from G7, it is a very long list of joint communique, and it is probably one of the most important joint communique from G7 in 20 years. And the joint communique mentioned about China 4 times, and those 4 times are all bad things about China. Number 1 is about the origin of virus, and number 2 is about China's unfair trade practices, and number 3 is China's provocative actions to break status quo in South China Sea, in Taiwan Strait, and also in East China Sea. And number 4 is China's unilateral actions at Xinjiang and Hong Kong, meaning China is not value the common value of human rights, democracy, and freedom. So the joint communique mentioned about China 4 times are all about bad things that China has been doing in the past decades. And number 2, I can, from reading the joint communique, I can feel those 7 countries having very high degree of consensus on particularly 4 issues. Number 1 is about the international assistance of vaccine to countries having very serious situation of pandemic. And number 2 is about this international infrastructure project. It might amount up to $40 trillion. So those 7 countries are having very high degree of consensus. Number 3 is about the reform international institutions, including WHO and WTO. And number 4 is about climate change. Climate change sounds like a very soft issue, but I think that will create the highest pressure on China, because those 7 countries might come up, produce a timetable all the way to 2030 to reduce emission at half of 2010 level. So my observation is those 7 countries might produce a new trade regime to combine trade conditions with emission reduction, and that will create a huge pressure on China, especially when China claims it's a developing country in any kind of climate change summit of conferences. So those 2 are my observations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor. Perhaps this should be the last call for questions from our audience. Meanwhile, I would like to ask the last question from my end, if you allow me to do so. Nowadays, we talk a lot about the prospects of perhaps the American version of Belt and Road project, or an alternative to the Chinese BRI project. Something which would resemble the Marshall Plan, whose aim would be to keep a democratic world alive and together and in good shape, and somehow counterbalance China's economic and actions, and those actions which actually exceed far beyond economic activity. So what do you think about the prospects of that kind of plan? Is it possible to create it? Is it possible to implement it? And what are the views from Taiwan and from Poland, or how this project could evolve in the context of Taiwan and in the context of Poland? So perhaps I would like to give the microphone to Professor Kuo at the very beginning.
I'm very sorry, I didn't catch your question. Would you please rephrase it?
I was asking about the prospects of the American alternative to the BRI project. There are talks that the Americans have the kind of new Marshall Plan in order to rescue democratic world and counterbalance China's activities. So what is Taiwan's perspective on the kind of plans, and what could be Taiwan's place and role in the kind of project if it's possible to implement?
Okay. First of all, I mean this B3W, Build a Better World, whatever. Yeah, I think this international infrastructure project is not solely from the states. It requires, again, as I just mentioned, it requires very high degree of consensus from the rest 6 countries. So I think only US alone won't work out for this, such a large scale of infrastructure project. And number 2 is, as you all know, Taiwan has this new southbound policy, and Taiwan is also very good at a lot of infrastructure projects within the country and also outside the country. So I think the U.S. I remember the U.S. State Department released a report last year, also saying that Taiwanese new southbound policy can link up to the U.S. Indo-Pacific strategy. Although Joe Biden is not talking about Indo-Pacific strategy anymore, but I definitely think there will be a very high degree of cooperation between Taiwan and these new international infrastructure projects. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So perhaps I would like to ask Professor Rajczyk about the Polish views of American plans and the prospects of Polish-American cooperation.
Probably it would be a question better for the Polish foreign minister than me, but if I may, I would like to focus on one thing. If that plan had been introduced, it would have concerned the question of world supply chain, and the most important one, it would be a question of semiconductors and chip processors. Taiwan is the second largest producer of those devices into the world. So this plan might put Taiwan in the center of world interest, but it's kind of futurology maybe. So that's what I think about it.
Thank you very much. It's a very important thing to remember about the semiconductors, because this is what Taiwan is very proud of, and this is really a very important matter here. So finally, Professor Zamecki, what do you think about the prospects of this American counter-BRI project, and what would Poland's place be in it?
I think this is a really huge issue, and it's quite important. And that's very good that United States proposed such plan. When China proposed the Belt and Road Initiative, among my colleagues, I underlined that this is the time for the United States to revive its role, because to give you a very, let's say, my personal experience. For the students in Poland, nowadays it's easier to travel and to study in China than United States. More and more students choose China as their place to spend few months, 1 year to study. And it's easier because thanks to some bilateral agreements, the Chinese side is financing, for instance, partially the stay of the students in China. So a lot of students choose China than some Western countries, and of course that's good that China proposed such activities. But from the point of view of the United States, I had a feeling, the personal feeling, that United States is losing a kind of position, role, the soft power position, and should propose something to the, for instance, to the students, to the scientists, to the citizens here in Europe. And I think that finally United States noticed that this battle for the heart and souls of the Europeans should be started. So I believe that that's good, because even taking into consideration the issue of values, it will be closer for European citizens to be more involved in the cooperation with United States probably than with China. So from the United States position, I believe this is very good investment for future.
Thank you very much, Professor, for your answer. And I would like to thank all our distinguished guests for participation. I believe it was a very, very interesting, insightful webinar connecting various parts of the world. And as always, we finished with China, because it's impossible to talk about the future of international relations, of international order, without referring to China. So this part wasn't really surprising, but I believe that many of us, well, including myself, of course, and our listeners, learned something new. And I hope this will be a good start for further discussions and further Polish-Taiwan academic cooperation. So thank you once again. And stay healthy and safe, no matter whether you're in Poland or Taiwan, because pandemic is not over yet. Thank you again, and see you next time.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you.
Thank you.